They thought it was a joke, a beat-up Mustang, and a worn-out veteran with nothing left but a little girl and a rusted trailer. The crowd laughed when he raised his hand and paid a single dollar. But none of them saw what was coming. Because that broken horse? He wasn't broken. He was waiting, and the man they tried to mock was about to remind everyone what resilience really looked like. The Wyoming sun rose over Blackthorn Hollow with a kind of dusty defiance. Summer hadn't arrived with any softness that year. The wind came in dry, sharp with grit, tossing up powdered earth across the cattle trails and painting the sky in hues of rust. Out past the town's edge, where the paved road lost its patience and crumbled into gravel, a rusted-out mobile home stood among the wild brush and knotted pines like a forgotten war relic. Inside that home, Wade Colburn stirred his black coffee with the end of a bent spoon. The mug was chipped, the table uneven, but the silence that wrapped around him was whole. A man who had once moved through foreign battlefields with command and precision now found more battles in balancing a grocery list or keeping the roof from leaking when it rained. The scars on his forearm had faded into pale memory, but the ones in his chest hadn't. Across the room, sprawled on the floor, with a stub of charcoal clutched in her fingers, 10-year-old Eli was drawing horses again, this time along the bottom of the trailer wall. The legs were too long, the hooves awkward, but the eyes were hauntingly right. She didn't speak much, didn't need to. The way she looked at the world said everything. "You're going to run out of wall before you run out of horses," Wade muttered, sipping the bitter brew. Eli looked up at him with a half-smile and pushed a strand of hair behind her ear. "This one's different," she said softly. "He's not running, he's waiting." Wade blinked. He didn't ask what for. Maybe she didn't know. Maybe she did. The Founders' Day Horse Derby was in 2 weeks, and all over town, ranchers were brushing the dust off their finest saddles and polishing boots that hadn't seen dirt in months. Blackthorn Hollow turned itself inside out for the Derby. It wasn't just a race, it was a show. Wealth, pride, legacy. And nowhere did that shine brighter than in Deacon Harlow's stables. Wade hadn't set foot in those stables since the day Deacon fired him, right after the cancer took Cassie, Wade's wife, and the bills came crashing down like a wave of barbed wire. Wade had taken a temporary gig, fixing stalls and fences. Temporary turned out to be 3 weeks, a half paycheck, and a door slammed in his face. Still, when Eli tugged on his sleeve that morning and asked to go to the auction yards, he said yes. He didn't have the heart to say no to her, not when she asked so little. The auction yard buzzed with heat and tension. Dust swirled between the planks, and the smell of hay, sweat, and manure clung to the wood like a second skin. Wade kept to the edges, hands in pockets, letting Eli wander ahead, eyes wide. Most folks there didn't give him more than a passing glance, but the ones who did ranch hands, old co-workers. A few men in Deacon's employ offered those half-smirks Wade had grown used to. The kind that said, "You still around?" The horses came out in waves, sleek, muscled quarter horses with bloodlines longer than the town's founding documents. Deacon stood in the shaded box above the ring, surrounded by local dignitaries and other ranch owners, sipping lemonade like a Roman emperor watching gladiators. And then came the last lot. The animal emerged with a stumble, a gray Mustang, barely standing. Ribs like the frame of a ruined ship, skin sagging over sharp bones. One eye wept, his hooves were cracked, no saddle, no halter. Just a loose rope and a nervous handler who looked more embarrassed than anything else. Someone in the crowd snorted. "That ain't a horse, that's a ghost. Maybe it's free with purchase," another chuckled. "Hell," Deacon's voice carried from above, rich with sarcasm. "Someone ought to take it home for sentimental value. Makes a nice centerpiece. Real tragic." Eli stood at the fence, eyes locked on the Mustang. Wade moved to pull her back, gently. "Come on, darlin', he's done. But she didn't budge. The horse turned, just slightly, and its good eye met hers. Not the way an animal looks at a person. Something else. Something heavier. Eli stepped forward, one hand on the splintered wood, the other over her heart. "You don't have to be scared," she whispered. "You're not nothing. I see you." Silence fell. Even the mocking voices faded. The auctioneer looked confused. Do we have a starting bid on lot 47? $2 to take it away," someone shouted. "-2, came another. Ely turned to Wade. Her voice was small, but it cut through the noise. "Don't let him die here, Daddy." Wade didn't move for a moment. Then he reached into his back pocket and held up a single, crumpled bill. $1, he said, clear and steady. A pause. Then laughter. The kind that rolls down hills and kicks up dust behind it. Deacon leaned over the rail, his teeth flashing. "That your new Derby champion, Colburn? You gonna race that thing or bury it?" Wade didn't respond. He handed over the bill, took the frayed rope, and led the Mustang out of the pen. The horse limped beside him in silence. No cheers, no applause. Just Ely walking a step behind, her fingers brushing the horse's flank like she was already drawing him again. At the gate, someone hollered, "Name him yet?" Wade didn't turn, but Eli did. She looked back at the crowd, chin high, eyes sharp. "His name's Buckshot," she said. And with that, they crossed the line between who they'd been and who they might yet become. The mobile home creaked under the weight of wind that hadn't stopped blowing since dawn. Out here on the edge of Blackthorn Hollow, where the map curled up like forgotten paper, no one came looking unless they were lost or looking to be. Wade Colburn knew that well enough. He stood out back, sleeves rolled up, staring at a pile of salvaged lumber, army tarps, and rusted tin sheeting that used to be the side of a chicken coop. A make-do shelter, he figured. Maybe good enough to keep the sun off Buckshot's back, if it didn't collapse in on him first. The horse stood a few paces away, unmoving. His ribs still showed like the bones of an old wreck. His left hind leg quivered every now and then when he shifted his weight, but his eyes, those tired, dark eyes, followed every hammer strike, every board raised. Wade grunted, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a splintered wrist. "Not much of a palace," he muttered, "but it's the best we've got." Inside, Eli sat cross-legged on the floor, charcoal smudges on her cheeks and elbows. The walls of the trailer had become a gallery of her imagination Mustangs, galloping across imaginary plains, manes flying like smoke. But this morning's drawing was different. She was slow, deliberate, working over the same spot again and again until the paper wore thin. Buckshot's eye. She'd drawn it a dozen times, but never like this. This one looked real, watchful, sad. She tucked the charcoal away and stepped outside barefoot, squinting into the sunlight. The structure Wade built leaned hard to the left, but it stood. Buckshot didn't flinch when she approached. He never did with her. Eli reached up and touched his muzzle, whispering, "You belong to the sky." He lowered his head, soft breath brushing her shirt. That night the wind turned cold. Thunder rolled low and wide across the valley, and the first crack of lightning flashed like a war drum across the horizon. Wade bolted upright in bed, half expecting to hear shell fire. But what he heard was worse. Wood cracking, hooves beating earth, a snort like panic. "Buckshot!" Eli screamed. By the time Wade threw on his boots, the fence was down. Not broken, obliterated. The tarp fluttered like a ghost in retreat. Rain came sideways, stinging his cheeks. They followed the tracks, Eli in her raincoat 2 sizes too big, Wade with a flashlight flickering against the dark. Through the soaked pasture, past the creek, up toward the abandoned chapel on the far edge of town. There he was. Buckshot stood motionless beneath the rotting archway, head bowed, soaked to the bone. His body trembled, but he didn't run, didn't flinch. Eli reached him first, stepping slow, arms out. She pressed her cheek against his neck. "He wasn't running away," she said. "He was remembering." Wade stood beside her, hands on his knees, panting. Remembering what? The answer came in the soft crunch of gravel. A woman approached from behind the chapel's side. Hair pinned under a damp ball cap, stethoscope still looped around her neck like she'd walked out of a shift mid-sentence. She had eyes like blue steel and boots caked in barn dust. "Lorraine Carter." "You ought to leash your ghosts tighter," she said, half smiling. Wade straightened. "Didn't know ghosts ran on 4 legs." Lorraine stepped closer, gaze fixed on Buckshot. Her hand trembled as she reached out, brushing his cheek. Then she whispered, almost to herself, "Oh, my God." She turned to Eli. "Where'd you get this horse?" "Dad got him at the auction," Eli said, "for $1." Lorraine swallowed. "This is him. I thought—" "No, I was sure they put him down. His name used to be Buckshot. My mama gave him that name." Wade tilted his head. "You're saying you knew this horse?" "I more than knew him. He was family. My mother raised him from a foal. He was the only thing she trusted after my daddy left." Lorraine's voice cracked. "When she passed, I was 15. Her husband. My stepdad sold Buckshot for cash before the funeral flowers even wilted." The wind howled low between the chapel stones. For a moment none of them spoke. Then Eli said, "He found his way home." The next day Lorraine came to the trailer with a toolbox in one hand and a crate of balms and brushes in the other. She wore coveralls and boots like she was prepping for battle. Wade raised a brow. "Didn't know you made house calls." "I don't, but this ain't a house, it's a cause." She knelt beside Buckshot's leg, inspecting the swollen joint. "Advanced arthritis, probably some tendon scarring. Someone tried to run him hard on a bad leg." She traced a faded scar. "And this? That's a cut-down tendon. He was hobbled probably to keep him from bolting. Common in old race horses when they get passed around." Eli stood nearby, fingers clenched. "Can we fix him?" Lorraine glanced up. "We can try, not with medicine, but with patience." And so began a new rhythm. Mornings started with warm water and Epsom salt soaks, afternoons with red clay packs, and evenings with pine tar rubs Wade remembered from his days treating trenchfoot overseas. Lorraine showed Eli how to move slowly, how to read the signs in a flicking tail or flattened ear. One afternoon, Lorraine brought an old saddle. It was cracked along the seams, the leather faded with time, but it had her mother's initials burned into the flap. Buckshot sniffed it, nudged it once, then stood very still. Lorraine said nothing. She just placed it over the fence, like returning a relic to a shrine. Later that night, Eli crept out with something balled in her hand, a ribbon, sky blue and frayed at the edges. It had once been her mother's, tucked in an old jewelry box, long forgotten. She tied it gently around Buckshot's neck. "You don't need to win anything," she whispered. "You already found us." The next morning, a letter waited in the mailbox. No return address, just Wade's name scrawled in a handwriting he knew too well. Inside was a single line. "I heard you registered that nag for the Derby." "Don't embarrass yourself, Colburn. Your daughter deserves better." No signature. But Wade didn't need one. He folded the paper, lit a match, and dropped it into the old coffee can he used for ashes. The flame caught fast, curling the edges inward. He looked out at the field where Buckshot stood, eyes half-lidded in the sun. "Let 'em laugh," Wade muttered. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't care who heard. The sun rose slow and dusty over Blackthorn Pool. A fine film of ash-colored pollen drifted across the hills like breath from the earth itself, settling on fences, truck hoods, and the backs of tired horses. Out at Wade's place, if you could even call it that, the morning routine had already begun. Lorraine Carter knelt by Buckshot's left hind leg, working with a practiced calm that came from years spent patching up creatures that never asked for help. Her hands, calloused and sure, moved over swollen joints and the hard ridge of tendon scar tissue. She pressed gently, noting his flinch. "He's holding tension here," she said. Wade, standing nearby, wiped his hands on an old towel. "You think it still hurts?" "Not like it did," Lorraine said. "But pain has memory. So does fear." Eli sat cross-legged on a patch of flattened grass, watching in silence, her sketchbook resting on her knees. She didn't draw that morning, just watched. Buckshot stood calm, the ribbon still tied around his neck, faded now, but still the color of sky. "You said he used to be your mom's horse," Wade finally said, voice low. "You ever ride him?" Lorraine didn't answer right away. She ran her hand along Buckshot's flank, then looked up at the horizon like she was watching something years behind her. "My mama believed in second chances," she said. "Not in people, but in horses." She stood, dusted her palms. "When she died, my stepdad, Curtis Holt, wasted no time. He took everything he could sell, tractors, saddles, tools, then Buckshot, sold him to a traveling show, claimed he was too wild for the farm. I was still at school when they loaded him onto the trailer. Never got to say goodbye." Wade looked at her, brows furrowed. "That was years ago." 17, her voice cracked, "and I ain't trusted a damn soul since." Buckshot turned his head slowly, nuzzling her shoulder like he understood every word. They moved him to a nearby pasture small, fenced in, with just enough shade and space for daily stretches. Lorraine started him on basic exercises, coaxing movement out of stiff joints and tired muscle with patience and repetition. Some days he refused to budge. Others, he followed her like a shadow. Wade dug out an old toolbox and started rebuilding the fence proper. He used salvaged posts, mismatched nails, and what wood he could trade for favors at Reggie's lumberyard. By week's end, the crooked field looked less like a junkyard and more like a home. One afternoon, Lorraine pulled a weathered bridle from the back seat of her truck. "This was my mama's," she said. "Smells like cedar and thyme." She didn't ask permission, just walked up to Buckshot and held it out. He sniffed the leather wannons, then lowered his head. Lorraine fastened it gently, tears catching on her lashes. "I thought he'd forget," she whispered. "But maybe horses remember kindness better than people do." That night, Wade couldn't sleep. He sat out on the porch with a beer going warm in his hand, the stars spread above like spilled salt. Buckshot lay on his side in the field, the ribbon still visible even in the dark. He heard the trailer door creak. Eli padded out, dragging her blanket behind her. "Couldn't sleep," she mumbled. Wade nodded. "Me neither." They sat together in the quiet. "Why do people hurt animals?" Eli asked. He sighed. "Because hurting something weaker makes them feel stronger." "That's stupid," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. "It is." A few days later, Lorraine showed up with 2 bags of supplies and an idea. "You ever try hydrotherapy?" she asked Wade. "Closest I've been to therapy is drinking beer in a hot bath," he said. She smirked. "We're improvising." They converted an old kiddie pool into a makeshift cold soak. Wade hauled buckets of well water while Eli collected smooth stones from the creek bed. Buckshot, skeptical at first, eventually stepped in, the water lapping at his knees. Eli clapped. "He's smiling," Wade grinned. "That's not a smile, sweetheart. That's tolerance." Lorraine chuckled, "Which is close enough to trust." Over the next week, they added massage, stretches, even music. Eli played old records from her mother's collection, Johnny Cash, Patsy Cline, Roy Orbison. Buckshot didn't mind the scratches or the warble. He stood still, eyes half closed, like he was listening to something only he could hear. Then came the letter. Wade pulled it from the mailbox, the paper stiff and expensive. The envelope bore the stamp of the Founders Day Horse Derby Committee. He opened it slowly, hands calloused and uncertain. Registration confirmed. Entry: Wade Colburn, horse, Buckshot. He folded the letter and placed it on the table, saying nothing. Lorraine saw his face. "You're in, aren't you?" He nodded. She crossed her arms. "You sure about this?" "Nope." Eli ran in, barefoot and wild-haired. "We're gonna race?" Wade knelt, hands on her shoulders. "We're gonna try." That evening, Lorraine stayed late. The three of them sat around a campfire made of cedar limbs and old fence posts. Sparks flew into the sky like tiny prayers. "I don't care if he wins," Eli said, tracing circles into the dirt with a stick. Lorraine smiled. "What do you care about?" "That he knows he matters." Wade looked over at Buckshot, sleeping near the fence, the ribbon fluttering in the breeze. "He knows," he said. As the fire burned down to embers, Lorraine stood. "My mama used to say, horses are like mirrors. They show you the truth about yourself." Wade nodded. "I guess I've been afraid to look." She reached out, hand on his arm. "Then maybe it's time you did." Just before bed, Eli tiptoed out one last time, kneeling beside Buckshot. "I tied that ribbon so you'd remember her," she whispered, "but now I think it's to remind you that you're not alone anymore." Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl called out. And in the silence that followed, it felt like the world had shifted just a little. The morning of the Derby dawned bright and blistering, the Wyoming sun already stinging bare skin before 8 a.m. Dust clung to everything: jeans, boots, the folds of worn saddles. The Blackthorn Hollow Fairgrounds buzzed with anticipation. White tents flapped in the breeze, the scent of funnel cakes and leather mixing in the air. And over the loudspeakers came the rustle of country classics and last-minute announcements. Wade Colburn stood by the makeshift stall they'd borrowed, if you could even call it a stall. 3 plywood walls, some shade netting, and a bucket of water. Buckshot stood calm inside, chewing slowly, head low, but eyes bright. "You nervous?" Lorraine asked, handing Wade a canteen. "Terrified," he muttered, "but not for me." Eli bounced on her toes beside them, wearing a blue sundress with her worn boots. She had a fresh sketch of Buckshot tucked in her pocket and the blue ribbon tied in her braid. Tommy Rourke, the Derby's MC, limped over from the announcing booth. His left leg, once shattered in a rodeo wreck, now dragged slightly, but the fire in his eyes hadn't dimmed. "Thought I was seeing ghosts," he said with a grin. "That's Buckshot, ain't it?" Wade nodded. "You know him?" "Hell yeah," Tommy said. "Raced against him once, back when I had both kneecaps intact. He dusted me like an old rug." He turned toward the track, voice softer. "They laughed at me, too, you know, after the wreck. Say it I was useless. Dead weight." Wade looked at him. "What did you do?" "Got back in the saddle," Tommy said, tapping the mic strapped to his chest. "Just a different kind." He paused. "You need anything out there, I'll be watching your back." From across the field, Deacon Harlow approached, dressed in white linen like he was headed to a garden party instead of a horse derby. His grin was razor thin. "Well, well," he drawled. "Didn't think you'd actually go through with it, Colburn." Wade didn't answer. Deacon's gaze slid to Buckshot. "Must have dug that thing out of a crypt. Or was it a pity purchase?" Eli stepped forward before Wade could speak. "He's not a thing, and he's not for pity." Deacon laughed, clapping his hands. "How adorable! You should teach her not to get attached to disappointments." Lorraine stepped between them. "You done?" Deacon smirked. "I'll make it simple. You step down now, I'll hand you 500 cash. Walk away with your dignity. No need for the crowd to see your horse collapse on lap 1. Wade looked down at Eli, her hand clenched into a fist. "Keep your money," he said. Tommy's voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, racers to your marks. It's almost time." As the competitors led their horses to the starting line, Wade adjusted Buckshot's reins. The old Mustang shifted beneath him, muscles taut but ready. Lorraine gave Wade a nod. "You don't have to win, she said. "I know." "You just have to finish." Eli stepped close and placed her palm flat against Buckshot's chest. "You don't have to prove anything," she whispered. "But if you want to run, we're with you." The stands were packed. Families waved little flags. Kids licked popsicles that dripped down their arms. But when Buckshot took his place in line beside a gleaming bay named Blaze Deacon's prize stallion, the laughter started. A man in a cowboy hat shouted, "What's he riding? A ghost?" Another called out, "Hey, Colburn, you racing or making a sympathy parade?" Deacon, already mounted on Blaze, gave a mock salute. "Try not to break a hip, soldier." Wade ignored them. The starter raised the flag. A heartbeat of silence. Then, "Go!" The horses lunged forward in a blur of hooves and dust. Buckshot stumbled on the first stride, but righted himself. The others surged ahead, thundering down the track in polished unity. From the grandstand, a chorus of laughter followed him like a tailwind. Wade leaned in close. "Easy now, it's just noise." Buckshot ran slow, steady. He wasn't fighting the bit. He was conserving. At the first turn, Blaze led by a mile. The crowd roared. Wade heard Deacon whoop and crack his reins like a war drum. Behind them, a little boy turned to his father. "That gray one, he's not even trying." But at the back of the crowd, Tommy stood watching through his binoculars, lips tight. "He's waiting," he muttered. Around the second bend, the pack shifted. One horse veered wide. Another rider lost a stirrup. Dust clogged the air. Wade and Buckshot slid past one rider, then another. And then came the third curve the church corner, the very place where Buckshot had once stood still in the rain. Eli, hidden behind the steeple, gave the rope one sharp tug. The bell tolled. Once, twice. Buckshot's ears flicked. He didn't slow. Instead, he leaned into the curve like he knew it by heart. Wade whispered, "You remember, don't you?" And Buckshot ran. The crowd hushed. He surged forward, not fast, but with purpose. Past another horse. Then another. By the final turn, he was fourth. Tommy's voice lit up the air. "Look at that Mustang go. That's Buckshot, folks. A legend back from the grave." Deacon turned, eyes narrowing. Blaze responded with a burst of speed. But Buckshot had fire left. He didn't charge like a war horse. He moved like wind on the plains fluid, silent, relentless. 10 yards to go, then 5. Then the finish line snapped beneath Buckshot's hooves just ahead of Blaze's. Silence, then a sound like thunder. But not from the hooves, from the crowd. Cheers erupted. People leapt to their feet. Hats flew. Tommy's voice cracked with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, Buckshot wins!" Wade dismounted and turned to his horse. Buckshot was trembling, and then his knees buckled. He dropped to the dirt. Wade dropped to his knees beside him, hands on the Mustang's face. Hey now, you're okay. You did it, old man." Eli ran to them, threw her arms around Buckshot's neck. Lorraine pushed through the crowd with a water bucket, face pale. But Buckshot opened one eye. Just enough. Eli whispered, "You're still here. I knew you would be." Deacon stood frozen on his horse, the crowd's roar like static in his ears. He yanked Blaze around and disappeared into the parking lot, unnoticed. Tommy limped down from the booth and laid a hand on Wade's shoulder. "Guess we both showed him, huh?" Wade smiled. He didn't need the trophy, didn't need the headlines. He had his daughter, a horse that wouldn't quit, and something else, dignity, the kind they couldn't mock anymore. Dust had barely settled when whispers began to ripple through Blackthorn Hollow like wind between the stalks of forgotten wheat. Buckshot had won. Not just placed, but crossed that finish line first, in front of everyone who had dismissed him as broken, in front of Deacon Harlow and his prize stallion, in front of the very people who laughed at the notion that a limping old Mustang and a worn-out Marine had any right to dream. But dreams, it seemed, didn't need permission. That night, the town buzzed like a kicked beehive. Some called it a miracle. Others chalked it up to a fluke. But for Wade Colburn and the small crew who believed in something more than what the eye could measure, it was nothing short of redemption. Back at their small lot behind the mobile home, Buckshot lay on a bed of hay, blanketed and still. A portable fan Lorraine had borrowed from the vet clinic blew over him, keeping the heat off his back. Wade sat beside him with his boots off, cross-legged like a soldier keeping vigil for a fallen comrade. "You gave everything out there," he murmured, fingers brushing through the Mustang's mane. "And they finally saw what I always knew." Eli brought a small bowl of cool water and set it beside her dad. "He moved like the wind, Daddy," she whispered, "like he belonged out there." "He did," Wade replied, "and not just out there. He belongs." Lorraine walked up with a soft smile. "He'll be sore, but he's not broken. Not anymore." She placed her hand over Buckshot's chest. The heartbeat underneath was slow but strong. "Tomorrow," Lorraine added, "he needs rest. But after that, we start healing the rest of him." Wade looked at her. "The rest of him?" She nodded. "His spirit's back. Now we help his body catch up." Across town, the lights were out at Harlow Estates. Deacon sat alone in his glass-walled office, staring at the photo of Blaze on the wall. His phone buzzed endlessly sponsors, reporters, investors asking what happened. But the only thing he could see was the gray Mustang crossing the finish line. The next morning, Tommy Rourke showed up at Wade's mobile home in a rusty pickup truck. In the back, he had tools, nails, a bundle of salvaged timber. "You got a minute?" he asked. "For what?" Wade stepped onto the porch, still barefoot, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Tommy pointed to the empty patch of ground beside the trailer. "Thought we might build him a proper stall, one with shade, maybe a tack wall, something worthy." Wade blinked, then smiled. "I'll get the hammer." By noon, Tommy and Wade had the frame up. Eli sat cross-legged nearby, sketching the blueprint with a dull pencil on a pizza box. Lorraine brought sandwiches and lemonade. Buckshot stood nearby on trembling legs, watching them. The wind ruffled his mane. The ribbon Eli had tied still fluttered at his neck. Over the next few days, things changed, slowly like creek water warming in spring. Tommy brought his nephews over to help with the roof. Lorraine arranged for leftover medical supplies to be delivered from the vet clinic. A neighbor offered old fencing materials. Someone else brought bags of oats and liniment balm. People Wade didn't even know by name stopped by, some with tools, some with stories. One old woman handed Eli a photograph from the 80s. "That's Buckshot," she said, voice shaking. "He once saved my grandson from being trampled during a barrel run. Never forgot that look in his eyes." Whisper by whisper, the story of Buckshot spread not just as the horse who beat Blaze, but as the soul of something deeper, something lost and now returned. Then came the letter. Wade found it in the mailbox, no return address, just his name in thick block letters. Inside was a single sentence. "Don't get comfortable. There are things about that horse you don't know." Wade read it twice, then a third time. The paper trembled slightly in his fingers. He handed it to Lorraine, who read it and frowned. "Think it's Deacon?" "Maybe," Wade said, "or someone else who knows more than they're saying." Lorraine tapped her finger on the phrase, "Things about that horse you don't know." She looked at Wade, eyes narrowing. "Wade, do you know where Buckshot came from before the auction?" He shook his head slowly. "Just that he was tagged in a holding facility. No brand, no papers." She stepped back and exhaled. "We need to find out." That night, Wade couldn't sleep. He sat outside by the new stall, staring at the stars. Buckshot lay nearby, eyes half-lidded, but still watching the horizon. Eli came out and sat beside her dad. "Is he in trouble?" Wade didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Sometimes people want to bury what they're afraid will rise again." Eli leaned her head on his shoulder. "But we don't bury truth, right, Daddy?" He kissed the top of her head. "No, baby, we don't." The next day, Lorraine reached out to an old contact at the BLM, Bureau of Land Management. A woman named Nora Faulkner who owed her a favor from vet school days. Nora called back that evening. "There's something strange about that horse," she said. "The tag number 6694 isn't on any of our Mustang logs. Not from holding, not from wild gather, not from adoption lists. It's blank." Lorraine's breath caught. "How is that possible?" "There's only one way," Nora said grimly. "Someone scrubbed the record." Back at the stall, Buckshot stomped a hoof and let out a low, uneasy snort. Wade stepped out, saw the horse's muscles tense, his eyes sharp alert. "What is it, buddy?" Then, faintly, from down the dirt road, the sound of an engine. A black truck parked far off by the edge of the woods. A figure leaned against the fender, watching through binoculars. Then, like a shadow, it slipped away. Buckshot whinnied once short and sharp. Wade narrowed his eyes. Whatever this was, it wasn't just about a race anymore. It was about history, about memory, about what they tried to erase. But Buckshot had remembered, and now so would they. The days after the race felt like waking up in a town that had held its breath for too long, and now finally remembered how to exhale. Blackthorn Hollow wasn't the kind of place that welcomed change, not openly. Folks there held tight to what they knew. Dusty traditions, tight-lipped gossip, the unspoken rule that winners came from pedigree and money. But Buckshot had trampled all that in a single afternoon, leaving behind the shattered assumptions and the lingering echo of something stronger than applause respect. It didn't happen overnight. But you could see it in the way folks started nodding at Wade Colburn instead of looking past him, or the way kids leaned against the fence of the mobile home lot to get a glimpse of the silver-gray Mustang that ran like lightning and stared like he'd seen things he could never say. Lorraine Carter stood at the kitchen sink of her small house, watching the hill behind Wade's property glow in the morning sun. A breeze teased the corner of an old banner Wade had nailed to a fence post. It read, "Derby, Hope Runs Free." She turned back to the table where a worn notebook lay open. Scrawled across the top were the words, "Whisper Hills, Proposal Draft." Below it, scribbled in Wade's messy hand, "A place where silence heals, where horses aren't broken, they're heard." Lorraine tapped her pen, then circled the phrase. She knew exactly where the name came from. Eli had whispered it first. "Why don't we call it Whisper Hills?" the little girl had said days ago, sitting beside Buckshot in the tall grass. "Because when the wind moves up here, it sounds like voices from long ago, but kind ones, ones that don't yell or hurt." Wade had looked at her then, really looked. And for the first time in a long while, his eyes softened, like they remembered something tender. That's when it began. The plan wasn't about building a ranch, it was about rebuilding lives. Whisper Hills would be a sanctuary, not just for horses, but for people who'd been left behind, kids who didn't fit in, veterans who carried more than medals, souls that needed quiet to feel whole again. Tommy Rourke was the first to sign on. He rolled his wheelchair up to the porch and tapped the banister with a grin. "If y'all are building a place for the forgotten, I figure I qualify as charter member." Wade chuckled. "You sure do." Tommy pointed to a sketch Eli had made, a rough outline of a barn with ramps instead of stairs. "We'll need wider doors, and maybe some of those whisper panels to help the horses feel safer." "You mean sound baffles?" Lorraine asked, stepping out with a mug of coffee. Tommy winked. "I call 'em hush walls. Let the pain bounce less." They laughed, but it wasn't the hollow kind. It was rooted. The town started to take notice. Local lumber yards donated scraps. A retired builder offered blueprints. A grocery store manager set up a donation jar with a photo of Buckshot beside Eli, her hand on his muzzle. And then came the kids. The first was a boy named Mason, 9 years old. Didn't speak, not because he couldn't, but because he'd seen too much. His father had served with Wade overseas, didn't come home. His mother, Melissa, stood awkwardly at the edge of the fence, watching Mason inch toward Buckshot. "I don't know what to expect," she whispered. "He hasn't talked in almost a year." Wade said nothing, just nodded. Eli led Mason into the field, holding his hand like it was made of glass. Buckshot stood under the oak tree, head low, eyes half closed. Mason approached, slow, hesitant. Then, without warning, he placed his small palm on Buckshot's chest. No words, just connection. And the horse didn't flinch. He just breathed. Later that night, Mason sat in the hayloft and drew a picture of Buckshot. It was rough, wobbly, but the eyes were right, deep, watchful. And then, as Lorraine passed him a sandwich, he whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." She froze. Tears welled up instantly. Eli beamed. "He talked to Buckshot, too," she whispered. Day by day, the healing grew. Wade set up an old workbench and began teaching the kids how to carve leather for saddles. Tommy showed them how to braid reins. Lorraine taught massage therapy for sore joints, not just in horses, but in people. Whisper Hills wasn't just a name anymore. It was alive, but in the background, the shadow loomed. Deacon Harlow had disappeared from public view, but his influence lingered. There were rumors he was filing claims to reclassify the land behind Whisper Hills as restricted training zone. Some said he'd gone to the county commissioner with stories about unsafe facilities and unlicensed treatments. One day, a man in a suit showed up with a clipboard. "We received an anonymous report," he said, "about unregistered veterinary practices and improper zoning." Lorraine held up her license. Certified vet tech, and the land was grandfathered in under the Colburn family homestead clause. Wade crossed his arms. "Anything else?" The man looked around, then scribbled a note. "Just keep it clean. They'll be watching." That night, Wade sat on the porch, jaw tight. "They're not done," he muttered. "No," Lorraine agreed, "but neither are we." Later, Eli brought out an old wooden sign she'd painted with blue and white streaks like sky over mountains. In bold letters, "Whisper Hills, where broken things begin again." She hung it on the arch at the gate. Buckshot stepped forward, snorted once, and rested his chin gently on the wood. Wade smiled. "Looks like it's official." But deep in the woods, a trail camera Lorraine had set up blinked red. When she reviewed the footage the next morning, her stomach dropped. A shadowy figure had approached the pasture fence. Not to hurt, not to steal, but to leave something. A brand iron, still warm, still smoking, marked with a single letter, H. The same symbol she'd seen burned faintly into Buckshot's hide beneath old scar tissue. Her hands trembled. She called Wade over. He stared at the footage, then at the brand, then at Buckshot, who stood nearby with his head low as if waiting. "It's not over," he said quietly. And somewhere inside Whisper Hills, the wind picked up, soft and strange, like a whisper that hadn't finished what it came to say. Dawn broke over Whisper Hills in soft layers of gold and gray. The kind of morning that didn't ask for attention, but offered its quiet presence like a warm cup of coffee in calloused hands. There was a hush in the air, a reverent stillness that wrapped the hills like a wool blanket. No birds sang yet. No hooves stirred, just the sigh of the wind weaving through the tall grass, brushing against the old wooden gate with a voice as soft as memory. Wade Colburn stood on the porch of the rebuilt barn, a steaming mug in one hand, the other resting on the railing. His eyes weren't on the rising sun, but on the oak tree down by the pasture. The same one Buckshot always laid beneath when the mornings grew cold. Buckshot was there now, motionless. Eli sat in the grass beside him, curled into the curve of his body, her small hand resting against his chest. She wasn't crying, she hadn't said a word. She just breathed with him, slow and steady, as if hoping her rhythm would carry him a little farther. Wade walked slowly toward them. His boots made no sound on the earth. "He's still breathing," Eli said without looking up. "I know," Wade replied, his voice thick with something heavier than grief. "He's holding on for you." They sat like that for what felt like hours. Buckshot's breaths grew shallower. His eyes, usually sharp and aware, had dulled, but not gone dark. They still flicked toward Wade, then to Eli, not pleading, not afraid, just present. Lorraine joined them near mid-morning, kneeling beside Buckshot with a stethoscope in one hand and a faded ribbon in the other. The blue one Eli had tied around his neck when they first brought him home. She didn't need the scope. She could feel it in the air. "It won't be long," she said softly. "He's choosing his moment." Tommy rolled up in his chair, tipping his hat back with the edge of his thumb. "Stubborn to the last hoof," he said, voice cracking. "You tell him it's okay." "I tried," Eli whispered, "but I don't think he wants to go until he knows we're all okay." Wade reached forward, pressing his forehead gently to Buckshot's. "We are," he said, steady now. "Because of you, old friend." And then, as if waiting for those words alone, Buckshot released his final breath. A soft exhale, a quiet goodbye. No drama, no sound. Just peace. That afternoon, Wade dug a grave beneath the oak tree. No machines. Just his hands, a shovel, and the help of every kid who'd ever brushed Buckshot's coat or whispered into his ear. They wrapped him in Eli's drawing a cloth she had painted herself, full of stars and silver manes. Lorraine placed the blue ribbon over his heart. Tommy laid a single carved wooden horseshoe beside his head. They lowered him gently, no rush, no ceremony but the wind. When it was done, Eli stood before the small mound of earth, holding a plank of sanded cedar she'd worked on all week. She drove it into the ground with a mallet, tears streaking her dusty cheeks. On the wood, in childlike but sure letters, "Buckshot, the horse who waited." Below that, Wade had added in darker ink, "You weren't broken. You were brave." Whisper Hills didn't stop. It grew. Word spread about the place where silence healed and hooves found home. More children came, some with scars on the outside, others with bruises where no eye could see. Veterans, two faces, like Wade's, shoulders heavy with the things no one talked about, and every single one of them learned the same thing. It's not about fixing, it's about belonging. Lorraine turned her tiny vet shed into a full-blown therapy center, complete with heated stalls and low-lit rooms for equine-assisted counseling. Tommy led morning sessions where kids learned not how to ride, but how to listen. Wade worked the land. He built new corrals, planted wildflowers, hung wind chimes that sang like memories. He kept his mobile home, but no one called it rundown anymore. They called it the captain's post. Eli grew older. Her drawings became finer, more detailed. She sketched every horse that came through Whisper Hills, always starting with the eyes. And then, one fall morning, not long after the first frost touched the edges of the fields, a young boy named Daniel arrived. 8 years old, mute, foster care dropout, angry and silent. Wade met him at the gate. "We don't ask questions here," he said. "We just meet you where you are." Daniel didn't respond, just stared. Eli stepped forward, offered him her hand. "Come meet Haven," she said, Motioning to a gentle gelding grazing near the barn, the boy followed without a word. Later that day, Lorraine found him in the old church, sitting on the edge of the broken pew, Buckshot's ribbon in his hand. She paused, ready to say something, when she heard him speak, barely above a whisper. "He's still here, isn't he?" Lorraine's heart caught. She nodded. "Yes, baby. He always will be." The next morning, Wade carved something into the new arch above the main entrance to Whisper Hills. The old sign had faded, weather-beaten, time to start again. This time, he didn't just write a name, he wrote a promise, burned into the grain of the cedar. "Here lives the spirit of those who were told they couldn't, and did." And below it, in smaller letters, "Buckshot, the first to believe." As he stepped back, Eli slipped her hand into his. Lorraine stood beside them, quiet. The wind picked up, rustling the grass, spinning the chimes. From somewhere behind, Haven whinnied once clear and proud. And just beyond the gate, the breeze tugged gently at the blue ribbon tied to the fence post. It fluttered once, twice, then stilled, as if something unseen had stopped by to say, "I'm home." If this story moved you even just a little, drop a 1 in the comments, or a 0 if you're still speechless. We read every single one. And if you believe in second chances for both people and horses, hit that subscribe button. There's more where this came from. Real stories, real emotions, and sometimes just enough magic to change a life.